When I visited your museum studies class recently, we ended up having a really interesting conversation about AI. Not just what it can do, but when should it be used. And what struck me during that discussion was that the answer kept changing depending on the situation. Sometimes AI clearly felt helpful, even empowering. Other times it felt like something important might be getting lost along the way. And the reason the conversation also kept shifting is that every scenario brings a slightly different set of trade offs. Things like who is the audience and how much originality is expected, and how important is the human effort behind this work, and what are the consequences if something goes wrong. The question, should AI be used here, turns out to be pretty hard to answer because it's really a bundle of smaller questions about context and intent and responsibility. After that discussion, it made me start thinking, I wonder if there's a better way to surface some of these trade offs to make them more visible so that we can make more conscious decisions about this. So, this is not intended to calculate the right answer. There's probably not a right answer, but I wanted to have a way to help us have a discussion about how we think through some of these important factors. So, I built this thing called the AI trade off compass. I want to make it clear this is not a scientific model. The numbers aren't calibrated. It's definitely not meant to settle any debates. In fact, maybe it's not too bad if it starts debates. It's just a thinking tool, a way to explore how different factors push a decision towards how you choose to use AI. Now, on this landing page, I think I've introduced myself as a communications engineer. My brain naturally shifted towards a Shannon style of thinking about artificial intelligence. Shannon is Claude Shannon. You might have heard of Claude Code. It was named after Claude Shannon because he was a very influential figure in communication theory. If you look at the process through a lens of communication theory, it starts to look like something that we do in our field. The world's knowledge, everything on the internet, in books, in conversation, is the information source. Training a large language model is like performing an enormous lossy compression where we compress all this information into just a few trillion parameters. A trillion sounds like a lot, but a trillion parameters fits onto a hard drive pretty easily. It preserves useful patterns, but not perfectly. In fact, it's misaligned, and there's some things about it that give you some, many times, bad results. So when we write a prompt, we're injecting a signal into that compressed representation, and we're the humans. We're supposed to be using this as a tool. The human role in this is to play the role of the decoder. In a communication system, there's always a decoder. Our job is to take that probabilistic output of the model and to turn it into something meaningful, accurate, and appropriate for the situation that we're using it in. So now I admit this is a pretty engineering way of thinking about things, but I think it's useful. I think it's really natural that this fits in the realm of information compression, noise, and decoding. Much more natural than just thinking of AI as some mystical oracle that gives you answers. So I think this idea travels well outside of engineering. I hope you use that, even though you don't necessarily need to know every line that's on this landing slide. So what I wanted to do next is talk about some of the factors that I have put into this compass. You could probably think of others, and in fact, you might think of a whole different column besides just the artifact domain and the creator domain. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. But my idea here is we are creators in museum studies. You're creating things. I'm a creator. I like to build things. There's an artifact domain. There's the thing that you're creating. And you typically have an audience that you're trying to deliver this to, and there might be factors that the audience expects. And so I try to list some of these things over here. And then in the creator domain, we are creating because we love creating, and it brings value to us. It enhances our lives, and so we need to think about that as well. If you turn some of the creative processes over to AI, you lose something in that process. So things like skill growth, you if you shortcut many tasks to AI, you're not developing some of the skills you might need. So this is a list of the factors, and so then on the compass, it has a way of comparing different use cases in AI. One of the things that recently came up for me was recommendation letters. Okay, sometimes students ask me to write recommendation letters. If it's a recommendation letter to a big company, I actually don't have too much of a problem with just using AI to a great extent, because I know that what's going to happen with that recommendation letter is the information density is really important. Okay, they're not going to really care if it was written by AI, because it's likely, look over here, Google's automated system, for example, might process that resume and route that to the right hiring managers and that sort of thing. So that is a different use case than a rec letter for some close contact where you're expecting some degree of authenticity. However, I find this particular use case, perspective and feedback access, sometimes I'll write a recommendation letter for a student or a person that I know, and I will ask the AI, how would the employer see this letter? What kind of things are missing? I find that to be a super valuable way of enhancing my ability to write recommendation letters. Okay, so there's lots of different use cases you can compare here. Another interesting one for me was this wedding speech uh, use case. This came up because I did give a speech. I'm the father down here in this discussion point. I used AI to brainstorm some ideas. I had some stories in mind, and I wanted a way to weave those together, and AI helped me make a mental model of how that speech was going to go. But it was all up in my head, and then I was able to deliver that speech, in an authentic way, and I felt like I just really nailed it on that in the wedding day. So, lots of things to talk about here. I hope you find this trade-off compass useful for discussion, and I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about any other use cases that you'd like to talk about.